One of the things that people often say to me when my choice to live a child-free life comes to light is, but you must have this sense of emptiness that you can't shift because there's something crucial and fundamental missing from your life. And I don't know what they're talking about, if I'm going to be honest, because there's just so much beauty all around us and so many sources of enchantment from non-human life and so many sources of fulfillment if we have the time to stop and spend time in nature and absorb all that beauty. My family is every Earthling, so I will never run out of animal people to spend time with.
That was today's guest, Joe. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining me. My name is Nandita Bajaj, and I'm the host of Beyond Pronatalism, Finding Fulfillment with or Without Kids, an interview series in which, through intimate conversations with women and men from diverse backgrounds, I explore how they are courageously and creatively navigating pronatalism, the often unspoken pressures to have children, whether from family, friends, or the culture at large. In each episode, I dive into personal stories with people who are forging unconventional pathways to fulfillment, including redefining what family means to them, whether that means being child-free or childless, having biological kids, adopting or fostering children or animals, or creating close-knit communities of friends and loved ones. Hi, Joe. Welcome to the show. Really wonderful to have you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's going to be really fun talking.
I agree. So, Joe, let's begin by hearing a little bit about your own background.
Yeah, so I'm in my early 40s. I've spent my whole life living in the United Kingdom. I grew up in rural England in an area called the Forest of Dean, so quite a naturey place. And I consider myself to be very fortunate in respect to having not had much direct pronatalist pressure exerted on me as I've grown up, and certainly as a young adult. I made the decision really early. I mean, I was really into the first years of adulthood when I became finally convinced that I did not want to have children. I did not want biological children. Hearing other stories on this podcast and through personal contacts, I'm realising more and more now how lucky I was to have grown up and to still be in a place where I'm not receiving much direct pronatalist pressure. Only a few years into my adulthood, I got married. So I was, I think, 26 when I got married. My wife also grew up in the United Kingdom, but tracing her family back a generation before, her family was living in Kolkata in India. And it's fair to say she has experienced more pronatalist pressure. And obviously some of it has rubbed off slightly on me. But been married 17 years. We haven't brought any children into this world. We feel a solid family unit, and we've been able to do that without ruffling too many feathers, to put it one way.
Yeah, this is really helpful background. And I appreciate that you didn't experience personally any or very few pronatalist pressures, which is wonderful and reflective of a world that we'd like to see. But what was the landscape like in rural England generally, outside of your family and relatives?
So as I was growing up, the first school I went to was a Church of England Christian school. And that is only because that was the local school to go to. I'm an atheist. And like with the choice to not have children, I knew I was an atheist very early in life. There was nothing I can recall that was specifically sort of forcing a life choice involving bringing children into this world. And in general, I would say, growing up in the 80s and 90s, it was a fairly liberal landscape in respect to people's personal choices were important and they mattered a lot. And not just in respect to my choice in regard to having children or not, but in respect to what education I wanted to follow, what type of career I might seek out. So it was all part and parcel of a liberal, progressive upbringing, which I'm very grateful. What I would contrast that with, though, is making the choice as an individual is one thing, but trying to take a stance about human overpopulation being a major issue, that has proved to be a lot more either controversial or subject to ridicule, I would say. But when I explain what I think about it, and maybe the reasons for not wanting to bring children into the world, which is principally about overshoot and overpopulation, and my love for nature, wanting to lead a life which doesn't sort of exacerbate the harms that humans as a species are causing. When I try to explain that, that's either been sort of laughed at as a bit of a silly position to take, I found, or caused some angst. So making a personal choice is one thing, and I found that's been respected, but trying to go beyond that and talk about this as being maybe a position that would be good for more people to adopt has not been so well received. For a few years, I was kind of thinking maybe I am strange, having this idea, I'm going to stick with my choice, but maybe I should just let this one go. But I found out about a charity in the UK, which is called Population Matters. It was such a great day when I found out they existed, and I started reading into what they stood for and what they spoke about. And I was like, okay, I'm not alone anymore. There's actually a lot of good sense in this idea of limiting ourselves reproductively.
And how did you first arrive at the knowledge? Were you reading, or was it more of an experiential thing that you were kind of seeing the degradation of the natural world around you?
I think it came from reading first. So certainly as I was getting into my late teens, I read a lot of publications about the state of the world. I was really interested in it in a global sense. I was interested in statistics about it. And that must surely have informed the position I took in my early adulthood of not wanting to have any children. Later on, though, that view has definitely been reinforced by direct experience. I'm now probably less interested in what the global statistics say. I'm not saying they're not important, but for me personally, what motivates me to want to live the way I do is actually direct first-hand experience. It's in part witnessing, for instance, a very obvious decline in the numbers of flying insects in the UK over the last 10, 15 years, which is attributable probably to use of pesticides to support our very large population. The UK has a very dense population. So that was definitely significant, but also just wandering around and having an Ordnance Survey map, so the UK mapping system in my hand, following a footpath, looking down, seeing, in the next half mile, I'm going to see some nice woodland on my right and there'll be some open land on the left, and then encountering a huge housing estate being built. So one of the first-hand environmental impacts of overpopulation. There are more hidden impacts, which is all the additional food needed and the impacts on water and all of that. But yeah, it's very striking going for a walk and expecting from your map that you're going to be wandering past open land and then seeing a housing estate. It has a certain impact on your mood and your mind.
Definitely. And I think we're seeing a rise in that anxiety and grief for a lot of people who are seeing the places that they've loved disappear. I don't think we talk about that enough, the mental health impacts on us. I'd love to hear more about how you became interested in insects and nature generally.
So that definitely goes way back to my early years on the planet. I had a relative who was really into wildflowers, and I'd go for walks with them and they would introduce me to new species of flower and trees. And this is when I was 6, 7, 8, 9. In parallel, I just had an instinctive love of non-human life. And then went to secondary school, so when I was 11, and things started to get a bit more serious. It was exams and jobs. And while I never felt any direct pressure, as I've already said, that I had to follow a particular path, it was just the way that society funneled young minds towards certain subjects being more important than other subjects. And my love of nature got buried. And although I had a sort of strong views about the need to protect the environment throughout my life, I think that love of nature that I had when I was 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe 11, just still, it didn't resurface again until probably when I turned 30. So I went maybe more than 2 whole decades of my life caring about the planet in a sense we needed to safeguard, quote unquote, resources, that sort of thing. But having love of life really be something that guided everything I do on a daily basis, that only resurfaced again when I was in my 30s. And now, the last 10, 12 years, I've spent catching up for lost time. So desperately trying to learn about all the nature around me that perhaps I could have been learning more about for those 2 missing decades. But I'm just grateful I got back to it when I did.
I definitely share that remorse with you. Why did it take me so long to wake up to an ecocentric worldview? And what was it in your early 30s that woke you up to this worldview? And how did that align also with your life path of having chosen to not have children?
I think it was probably just a case of my subconscious realizing that enough is enough. Seeing the way the world was going, something must have clicked when I hit 30. Then my experiences as a young child came back and were reinforced by what I'd learned since then. And of course, I wanted to do something about it. So I decided to go down to part-time working, something I've always wanted to do. In my case, I wanted to go part-time to allow me to return to study. So my studies has ended at the age of 21. I had a degree in zoology. So obviously I still cared somewhat about animals. Then in my early 30s, I went back to formal education on a part-time basis and studied for a master's in forestry. And they really let me start to explore ideas about ecocentrism, biocentrism in the essays I was writing as part of the course, which was brilliant. Meanwhile, I'm getting more and more of this hard data by relearning about the state of the world's forests, which is important, but it was really having the time to spend more time walking around outdoors, seeing firsthand, getting involved in recording biodiversity. All of these things work together, but it really was this firsthand experience of the state of life on Earth that probably tipped me over the edge into a hardcore ecocentric, let's say.
Nice. And you said you woke up to that around the age of 30, and you had already been married for a few years by that time. What was it that brought you and your wife together? Was there a shared love for nature or philosophy?
I think it was caring about the environment, definitely. So we met at university and some of our conversations were about that. Other common interests and probably in a way actually bonding over the fact we didn't want to have children. My wife knew at an early age she didn't want to have children either. Her reasons might be slightly different than mine, but it actually strengthened our bond. But I think the pressure shifted from being one of expectation from others to the fear of disappointing others. So that's sort of playing at the back of your mind that your choices do have impacts on other people, although that should absolutely be the choice of a couple. You are aware that it will disappoint your parents. It will deprive them of grandchildren. We were both lucky in that each of us has one sibling, and that sibling has gone on to have 2 children on both sides. And I don't know what that pressure would have looked like differently if we'd been only children or if our siblings hadn't done that. So I can only speak for what happened, but I must be realistic and say that that certainly lessened our fear of causing disappointment, because at least they had some grandchildren, even if we weren't contributing.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And so given that you've been married for 17 years and you've been leading a child-free life, what has that allowed you to do with your life, knowing from such an early age that you didn't even have to navigate this decision? How did that change your life path?
It undoubtedly has taken significant pressures off us that would have existed. Personally, I don't mind admitting I cope very poorly with anxiety. And separately from my decision in respect to children, I try to lead a life that keeps me away from potential sources of anxiety as much as possible. So I think it's very good that I made the choice I did and my wife made the choice she did with respect to children, because I'm not sure I would have coped at all in this increasingly complex world being responsible for the lives of one or more young people. So that's one thing. The other thing is really about what one can do with their free time. That is a very positive reality of not having children. So after finishing the Masters in Forestry, I've stayed part-time. In fact, I've gone down to working 2 days a week, so 15 hours. And in the sort of free time I've got, having finished my studies, I've tried to put it to some good use. So one of the things I've done and continue to spend time on is co-founding an ecological journal called the Ecological Citizen, which is an entirely volunteer-led project. Its mission has always been to offer a safe space for publishing ecocentric ideas, articles that challenge human supremacy, and that feels like a really good way to use my time. But other things I've been involved in have often ended up with me spending lots of time in front of a computer. So I've got my 2 days a week working where I'm in front of a computer, and I saw that it could very easily end up with me actually being in front of a computer 5 or 6 days each week, just doing 2 days working and 3 or 4 days volunteering for various projects. So beyond that, I've tried to get involved in more activities that are outdoors, spending time in nature. So one of the things that I really love doing is recording biodiversity, especially insects. So that just involves going on a walk somewhere. It may be a nature-rich place. It may be an urban environment, and identifying the animals and the plants I've seen to species level, and then submitting the data of what I saw and where I saw it and when I saw it to a national database of biodiversity in the UK. One of the things that people often say to me when my choice to live a child-free life comes to light is, but you must have this sense of emptiness that you can't shift because there's something crucial and fundamental missing from your life. And I don't know what they're talking about, if I'm going to be honest, because there's just so much beauty all around us and so many sources of enchantment from non-human life. All of the things that people get from bringing children into the world, I personally think are there to be got from just spending time in nature, getting to know perhaps animals in some deep way, whether that's through having pets or whether that's through getting to know the birds who visit your garden. It's obviously would be easy for me to just pretend that I don't have a feeling of emptiness when I do. I don't. There's just so much wonder and so much beauty and so many sources of fulfillment if we have the time to stop and spend time in nature and absorb all that beauty. My family is every Earthling, so I will never run out of animal people to spend time with.
That's very beautifully captured. There is, an endless source of awe and wonder on Earth. I don't know what emptiness means from that perspective. And I really, really love how you've shared it. Is there anything else you'd like to add to your story that we haven't touched on?
I'll mention one other thing, which is about insects, where my particular passion has ended up going down with natural history and the world around me. And it's a relatively recent crystallization of ideas that have been kicking around in the back of my head somewhere for many years. But in entomology, the study of insects, it's been the case for many decades that there is this unquestionable truth that killing is necessary. And it's done in some cases almost unthinkingly, that to know which insects are out there, which insects are in a wood, which insects are in a meadow, we have to kill them to allow them to be ID'd to species level, or to increase the efficiency or the objectivity scientifically of doing that. So I've been uncomfortable with that really from the start of getting into studying insects on an amateur basis. But only recently, so did these ideas finally crystallize, as I say, into something I felt like I could express. But writing is where I feel most comfortable expressing myself. So I was able to write an article a couple of months ago on something which I've called compassionate entomology. So it's proposing an alternative way to study insects. It's challenging the norm that killing is fine. And it's saying that as entomologists, we can be kinder and we can be more compassionate to the insects who we study. And also that I think conservation and the conservation efforts in these times of mass extinction would not be hampered by taking this approach. I honestly don't think that we get that much more information that we can actually use by killing everything so systematically. And going around making observations of live insects in the field can get us as much information as we could ever possibly use to try and stave off the extinction crisis, which is hitting insects as hard as any group of organisms.
Well, I'm so heartened to hear that you're studying something that is so underrepresented, even within conservation work. And I think even when we do talk about insects or the conservation of insects for biodiversity, it's always done from a perspective of what they mean for human well-being. And I think what you're pointing to with this compassionate entomology is what would it mean to give them the respect and dignity of which they are as worthy as we are. It's really nice to hear you're doing that. And I'm really grateful that you decided to join me on the show. Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. And I'm not just saying that, it really has. And I'm so happy that in the majority of these areas, we seem to have struck a personal chord where we are finding great similarities in our experiences of growing up and then leading adult lives with views that differ from the norm. And it's just really nice to talk to other people who've experienced that and realize there's lots of us out there.
Yeah, I very much agree. And I also am so grateful that you decided to share your story. Thank you so much. That's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. What did you think of this episode? Do you have your own story you'd like to share? Check out the show notes to see how you can get in touch with me. Whether you'd like to share feedback about the show or a particular episode, or whether you'd like to join me on the show to share your own story, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much again for joining me today as we collectively discover and celebrate the many different pathways to fulfillment beyond pronatalism. Beyond Pronatalism is brought to you by Population Balance, the only nonprofit organization advancing ecological and reproductive justice by confronting pronatalism. This podcast is produced and hosted by me, Nandita Bajaj, with the support of my production team, Josh Wild and Alan Ware.